Hello everybody, hello, welcome. It's Gettysburg 158 and we are on West Cemetery Hill. A place that, and I said that right by the way, it's not East Cemetery Hill, it's West Cemetery Hill, a place people really don't talk about. It was not attacked in force during the Battle of Gettysburg, and we need to unpack that. Why wasn't it attacked? What did happen? Why are there monuments here in the National Cemetery? Because there was a fight here before it was actually a cemetery. And you know, we'll bring you up to speed, we'll unpack some of that, hopefully we'll answer some of your questions along the way. I'm Gary Edelman. This is Gettysburg 158. You're with the American Battlefield Trust, and with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to my friend and colleague, Chris White.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We hope you're enjoying our coverage so far. So please check out all of our cool videos we have at YouTube and over at Facebook, and please do share these with your friends and family. And as Gary pointed out, we're standing on what's called West Cemetery Hill at Gettysburg. Most people have heard of the battle that took place on East Cemetery Hill on the evening of July 2nd, 1863. That's just off to my right. So folks are probably asking, you know, are you confused? What are you doing on West Cemetery Hill? Well, there was a battle that took place over here as well. It's not so well known because some of the units that fight over here don't write about it as much, but more importantly, battlefield preservation is a key component to interpreting any battlefield. And on this side of Gettysburg, I'm gonna just swing around for a second, you notice that the town is coming right up onto Cemetery Hill. We have restaurants back here, we have houses. Naturally, towns have to grow. So that's what's gonna happen out here. So much of this battlefield has actually been obliterated. So it's much more difficult to actually recreate what happened out here as well as tell this story. But that's what we're gonna try to do today. Now, to go from the 500,000 feet down to the 500 feet, let's take a step back to the morning of July 1st, 1863. On the morning of July 1st, 1863, Union and Confederate forces are clashing along the Chambersburg Pike, which is off out to the west of us. We have John Buford and his horsemen engaging with Henry Heath and his footmen, his infantry. That clash will turn into a clash of infantry on infantry when John Reynolds arrives with the left wing of the Union Army. He is killed at 10 to 10:30 on the morning of July 1st. But the Union First Corps is now online. Command of this field will devolve to a man named Oliver Otis Howard. He's in command of the Union 11th Corps, and he will arrive on the Gettysburg battlefield late on the morning of July 1st. He'll establish his headquarters on East Cemetery Hill. He is nicknamed Ut-O Howard by some of his men. Ut-O Howard's on the field, and he's also known by my friend and fellow colleague Frank O'Reilly that he's the pious but vapid Oliver Otis Howard. But Howard, when he arrives on the field, establishes his headquarters on Cemetery Hill, named for the Evergreen Cemetery that sits on the other side of the National Cemetery Annex and Gettysburg National Cemetery as well, Soldiers National Cemetery. So he establishes his headquarters there. Why? We need to be in a central location, easily findable for the men. What Howard will then do is go into town, try to find a vantage point, overlook the fields that he can. Goes to a place called the Fauna Stock Building, where we filmed some videos a few years ago. Go check those out. And then he will assess the situation, which is growing more and more dire by the hour, because Confederates will start to arrive from the north along the Carlisle Road and along the old Harrisburg Road. We'll have more Confederates coming down the Chambersburg Pike. So we essentially have a two-sided box coming in on top of these Union soldiers. More Union soldiers will arrive, and that will be Howard's 11th Corps, who will march north through town. They will arrive on the Gettysburg Plain, where we shot some videos yesterday, and they will start to deploy. Around 3:15 in the afternoon, the Confederates will renew their assaults with vigor, and the Confederates will start to hit the Union 11th Corps on the right flank, Chancellorsville style. The 11th Corps gets hit on the flank and starts to fold up. And then more Confederates will come down the Carlisle Road, and the 11th Corps will start to be dislodged, and they will start falling pell-mell back towards Gettysburg through the streets. Same time, over on McPherson Ridge, the Union First Corps is dislodged, pushed back to Seminary Ridge, where members of the American Battlefield Trust help to preserve land at Lee's headquarters and near Schmucker Hall at the Lutheran Theological Seminary. The First Corps is eventually dislodged, with Confederates pushing in from Oak Hill down Oak Ridge and then up Seminary Ridge, finally funneling the First Corps troops back into the town. The First Corps themselves, unfortunately, have a disadvantage. Their 11th Corps comrades had marched through the town of Gettysburg to get to the northern plain. But the First Corps troops are coming back into the town under heavy fire, and now are entering a town they have never marched through. Most of the First Corps troops had cut across Nicholas Kadori's farm and had the William Bliss farm and had moved north up to Seminary Ridge. They had never entered the town itself. So now they're going to start falling back towards Cemetery Hill. And some of the First Corps men said, we don't even know what Cemetery Hill is after the battle. We didn't know what the order was. But Oliver Otis Howard turns this into his Alamo. This is going to be his fallback position. He's going to leave one full division under Adolf von Steinwehr, which Steinwehr Avenue is named after, to be his fallback position. One of those brigades under Charles Coster moves up into town to try to help reinforce the 11th Corps, but kind of gets caught up in the wake of that 11th Corps falling back. They fight at a place called Coster Avenue today, where there's a great mural you can go check out, painted by our friend Mark Dunkelman. Then we will have another brigade over in this area, commanded by Orland Smith. Smith will be the fallback position for the Union forces. And now we will have Union soldiers coming down into the town itself. Some of them will start establishing a presence in what is today Gettysburg National Cemetery, or Soldiers National Cemetery behind me. Some of them will be right here in the cemetery annex. Some will take up residence in the buildings. The old Wagon Hotel, where there's a gas station today at the point of Steinwehr Avenue and Baltimore Street, will be turned into a small fortification. And the 17th Connecticut will start to put men behind a stone wall. They're going to start putting up tripwires. But more importantly, and most importantly, leadership will be on the field. John Buford, knowing the status of Oliver Otis Howard and his worth, is going to write back to George Gordon Meade and said, by God, send someone up here. Send us Hancock, meaning Winfield Scott Hancock. Winfield Scott Hancock arrives on the field, takes over this battlefield, and starts to stabilize the ship. Thomas Osborne and Charles Wainwright, two fine artillerists who we talked about at Benner's Hill, will start setting up a line of nearly 40 cannon, bolstered by what's left of the infantry here. Then arriving on the field will be the 12th Corps, the 3rd Corps. The Union position is stabilizing, but if Lee goes for broke and starts pushing across the fields from Seminary Ridge or down from the north, this position could be tenuous, but it's much stronger than most people give it credit for. And that's going to be the backbone of that artillery. So what we'll do is we'll switch over to Doug Dowds, but I want to tell you one story about Ed Bars. Most of you may have known Ed, and Ed, one of my favorite stories of him, the great historian who passed away recently a few years ago, was on the Gettysburg battlefield leading a tour. And this will tell you all you need to know about Oliver Otis Howard. He'll be on East Cemetery Hill, he'll collapse, he'll look up and say, by God, don't let me die underneath Oliver Otis Howard.
Thanks, Chris. So let's pick up this story. So he talked about all the forces coming on here. One of the things that Hancock is supposed to do is supposed to provide Meade word, and he's loath to step on Meade's toes of whether or not to call this a battlefield or not. So once he gets here and he realizes that this can, the time he arrives is when all this chaos is rolling back from north and west of town. Once they come up with a defense of this, he's going to send back two of his aides. He sends back Major Mitchell and eventually Major Parker to inform Meade that it is a pretty good position to have a battle, although it could be turned. With that, they will head south. They will get to Meade. Eventually, once Slocum arrives on this battlefield, Hancock will turn over control to Henry Slocum, and he too will ride back. And at this point, he'll now catch George Gordon Meade on the road, already headed here towards Gettysburg. Meade will arrive up here about midnight. The first thing he'll do is hop off, look to his generals and say, is this a good place to have a battle? They all assure him that it is. And he says, good, because the whole Army of the Potomac is headed this way. Now, when I say that George Gordon Meade arrives here, or that we are on Cemetery Hill, what's here? As Chris has pointed out, we need to get rid of a lot of these buildings because the southern edge of town is actually back closer to town. Anybody who've been to Mr. G's or the Rupp House has a good idea of where this side of town is. Otherwise, get rid of all these buildings and get rid of all these trees. These trees aren't here. For anybody that's familiar with Gettysburg and you've been here, you know kind of these north-south running ridge lines ripple out from Gettysburg like waves on an ocean, but they are rather thin ridge lines. If you think about it, if you've ever stood on Seminary Ridge or Cemetery Ridge, you know, an artillery battery in the front and the rest of the caissons and the limbers on the back. One of the most powerful things about Cemetery Hill is this idea of it is this broad, flat, clear, high ground. It makes it the key piece of terrain on this entire battlefield. Moreover, because of those characteristics, it becomes a massive artillery platform. They can stack artillery up, not only from the 1st Corps and the 11th Corps and parts of the 12th Corps, but soon the Artillery Reserve, those 118 pieces of artillery owned by the Army of the Potomac, will also send artillery onto this big platform. And it will then become not only the fallback position on day 1, but it becomes the center of the Union fishhook, where the bend in the fishhook is on day 2 and day 3. So, besides getting rid of all the trees, and we can see just over the wall behind me, that's where the soldier cemetery is when we talk about Lincoln coming to dedicate this place on the 19th of November, 1863. That's on the other side. We happen to be standing in the annex today. The annex is a part of the National Military Cemetery too, because we have over 7,000 soldiers from the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Korea, and even from Vietnam, who are also buried here before we finally close this cemetery. This is part of this great expanse also. So now we have these forces here. We continue with day 2 about how this setup takes place. We know the fighting will start south of field and it'll work its way up. And earlier we shot a video that talked about how eventually that echelon attack, that wave attack, breaks down about the center of the fishhook line. But that doesn't mean there's no activity here. In fact, arguably, there's a lot taking place here. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Gary, and let's go ahead and talk about actually the fighting that might take place on East Cemetery Hill.
Yeah, thanks so much, Doug, and thank you all for watching. I'm loving the comments right now. I'm looking for some better hashtags, but other than that, I'm very satisfied. Thanks to the Michigan Mud Digger for sharing it to your fans. I see the History Underground on here. If you don't watch JD's history at History Underground or his videos, you should. You might see JD on a video with us this evening, and we have a bunch of other videos. In fact, we haven't done any of the famous places yet, but look for Little Round Top and Pickett's Charge and the Wheat Field and all sorts of other things that we're really going to be doing, and we're happy to have you here. We have all sorts of other people I really want to talk about, but we can't get to everybody, so keep making your comments. Now, as Doug set up, there's all sorts of different things happening here you might not have known about. And I think the main thing people don't know about is the terrible ongoing fight that lasts at least for a day or two between Union forces here on Cemetery Hill and the Confederate forces posted a ways away, and there's a no man's land and everything. And to talk about that, here's our good friend and president and CEO of the Gettysburg Foundation. Really happy to have him here again, Wayne Mons.
Thanks, Gary. I appreciate it. I'll try to pick up where everybody really gave a good leave off here. So up here in the National Cemetery, as Chris mentioned to you, Orland Smith, Colonel Orland Smith, he is the brigade commander that's going to take possession here of what we call West Cemetery Hill, right on the very edge of the Taneytown Road. Now I'm going to swing you around. Chris, let's swing around and let's look at the 73rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment Memorial here, which was put here in September of 1887. And the position is right along the road. So we'll halt here and we'll turn and look over here behind my shoulder. Now, the town of Gettysburg has grown up on what used to be open fields during the time of the battle. You're about a mile from Seminary Ridge, where you're here on Cemetery Hill, and halfway in between, there's a long fence that runs right down the middle of a very high ridge. And it's between the Union and Confederate position. After July 1st, 1863, and the Confederates are going to take possession of Seminary Ridge, the Union Army soldiers with the 73rd Ohio and the rest here on West Cemetery Hill are going to take position over here behind me, and in between is this area that is a high fence which both armies are going to contest. Probably the most contested fence on the Gettysburg battlefield now in the Colt Park neighborhood here of Gettysburg along what is now Fairview Avenue if you drive it along in your car. On the evening of July 2nd, 1863, and the 73rd Ohio right out here behind me as skirmishers. Now, what's a skirmisher? A skirmisher is a group of soldiers that precede a main battle line. They're out there to harass, to detect the enemy, to capture prisoners, to collect information, and generally prevent the Confederates, in this case, from coming up against where this Union line and the artillery are located. And as I mentioned, this fence is right in the middle. So 73rd Ohio sends out these skirmishers, and who is one of the members that's out there fighting on the evening of July 2nd, 1863? It's none other than a 40-year-old private named George Nixon. George Nixon is the great-grandfather of President Richard Milhous Nixon. And on the evening of July 2nd, 1863, he's right over behind my left shoulder, several hundred yards out, when he's struck by a rifle bullet in the hip. He is critically wounded. He can't get off the battlefield. And part of his company come back up here to Cemetery Hill. And meanwhile, Nixon is calling the names of his comrades because he is lying out there and he can't get any help. Finally, one of his friends, Richard Enderlin, a German immigrant, a musician in the 73rd Ohio, volunteers several times. He's denied permission at first, But then after several times, he'll be given permission by the company commander of Company B, the 73rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment, to go out and get George Nixon, and Enderlin will crawl out using only the full moon. Now, full moon, that's bad if you happen to be a Union soldier out here on July 2nd. Good if you happen to be a Confederate, because you're going to have all these men that are silhouetted there, and so cautiously, carefully, methodically, you're going to have Richard Enderlin crawl out. He will find George Nixon about 10 feet from one of the rebel skirmishers, flip him over, and start to drag him up here to Cemetery Hill to safety. When he finally gets close enough, Richard Enderlin will throw Nixon on his back, stand up of course, and run up here into what is now the National Cemetery area, the cemetery annex, and Nixon's life will be saved. Unfortunately for George Nixon, that wound will prove mortal. One of the records say he died July 11th, another say he died on the 14th of July, but he died at the George Spangler Farm, the 11th Army Corps Hospital, which in 2008 was purchased and rehabilitated by the Gettysburg Foundation, which I'm proud to be the president and CEO of. So great connection out here on the skirmish line with the 11th Union Army Corps Hospital, owned and rehabilitated and saved by the Gettysburg Foundation. For this act, Richard Enderlin will get the Medal of Honor, and folks, he's born in 1843. That makes him 20 years old at Gettysburg. He dies when he's 87 years old in 1930, and he's one of 2 Medal of Honor recipients out on this line. He's buried in Grandview Cemetery in Chillicothe, Ohio, which is where many men of the 73rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment are located. So the battle line is right over here behind me, and you're driving through the town of downtown Gettysburg today, and you probably don't even know it. So this is a place that if you haven't explored, try to understand it here. The Confederates want this bad. That's why they're skirmishing out here, and they want to mount an attack against it. And to describe that sort of action, or non-action we call, let me call back my friend and colleague, Colonel Doug Downs.
Thank you,
Colonel.
So we talked earlier this morning about this attack that goes from south to north. Hood's division, McLaw's division, Anderson's division, and then things break down. Pender doesn't go, Rhodes. And then we picked up earlier, we were talking about Johnson this morning. He's now fighting up on Culp's Hill. And then Early's division will attack East Cemetery Hill. That's what we're talking about on the other side of Cemetery Hill. Well, wait, we talked about what might have happened to Pender, but what happens to Rhodes? He's been supposed to be coordinating as a member of Ewell's Corps that's supposed to be part of this fight going up on Culp's Hill and the eastern part of Cemetery Hill. Now remember, Robert Emmett Rhodes is Lee's only non-West Point division commander. He's a Virginia Military Institute graduate. I think Douglas Southall Freeman described him in Lee's lieutenants as a Norse god clad in Confederate gray, which is not a bad way to go down, by the way. Okay, so ultimately, his guys fight up on Oak Hill. We know that fight on the first day. They're going to round up Union prisoners in town, but ultimately, Rhodes's division is largely stuck in the town of Gettysburg. When we talk about the barricade on the inner visibility line as you go from Cemetery Hill down to the square in Gettysburg today, and you cross that, there was a barricade there. That was Rhodes' men. On Middle Street in Gettysburg, also Rhodes's men. So when we have this attack by Jubal Early's division, it almost starts at 8 o'clock at night. Think about it. Sun sets at 7:44 on July 2nd, 1863. No daylight savings back then. So it would be dark by 8:15. Almost entirely in the dark will those 2 brigades attack East Cemetery Hill. Now, Rhodes is supposed to be coordinating with this. What's going to happen is they're going to attack, they're going to break through Howard's line at the bottom of Cemetery Hill, and then all of a sudden we'll have men with club muskets and bayonets fighting artillerists with rammer staffs and handspikes. It'll be Winfield Scott Hancock on the other side of the line that says, man, that doesn't sound right, and he's going to send a brigade, Samuel... Sprigg Carroll, thank you very much. Red Carroll, they called him Red because of his red beer. And he would counterattack with Ohio men, Indiana men, and West Virginia men, drive those guys off. But meanwhile, we should ask, where's Rhodes? What he would write is, because his men are tangled up in town, it gets him a long time to pull them out of the houses and the basements and the upstairs to get them all back online, get them out of all these alleys and back roads and try and get them back into the open fields. And about the time that he does get them ready to cross a line of departure that they might support this attack on East Cemetery Hill, that attack is now being driven back in the dark, and Rhodes never gets his men going. we've talked about that Robert E. Lee would write after this battle, except for a proper concert of action, we would have been successful. And this is true. Normally, we refer to that breakdown of the echelon attack from south to north when it breaks down at Anderson and Pender's division. However, I would argue that lack of proper coordination extends all the way up to this northern part of Hill. About the time that the eastern part of Cemetery Hill should have been attacked, the western part of Cemetery Hill should have been attacked as well by Rhodes' large division, and yet it doesn't happen. One more opportunity lost for the Confederates. Gary?
Man, that's great stuff, Doug. And I'm so gratified to see so many great comments here. We've got 270 people watching. At the same time, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're on West Cemetery Hill at Gettysburg talking about the fighting here on, July 1st-ish, 2nd-ish, and then maybe even beyond here. And hopefully learning some things you didn't know about. A lot of you are really thanking us for bringing out the content. Like, first of all, I want to say thank you. First of all, members and supporters of the Trust are paying my and Chris White's salary. And let me tell you that none of the speakers we have are being paid. We're out here because we just adore this subject, and that you are watching and hopefully sharing with the people in your lives and helping, therefore, to propagate, our democracy by sharing this culture and history. You're doing your job. While you're at it, check out GettysburgFoundation.org, check out battlefields.org, and check out, of course, nps.gov/get. to learn about some of the things that are happening. So what I'd like to do is bring on Ann Mitchell, who's always pensive and always is coming on. She's our good friend. She's a family historian from Ancestry Fold 3. We have a great partnership going on with them right now. And Ann, I don't know, get ready, guys. She may have some questions. I know her.
I have questions, and I hope they're the questions you have too. So, as I've been here trying to understand this battle, and it is chaotic to read about, it's chaotic when you're here, and just to understand everything that's going on and why. And I was talking to Doug, and I had this aha moment because Doug's put it in perspective for me. He started talking about objectives, strategy, and tactics. Am I right, Doug?
So, yeah, when we really talk about this, we really want to refer to this as there's a strategic level, an operational level, and a tactical level. And here at Gettysburg, at the strategic level, we're talking about winning the American Civil War. At the operational level, we want to think about the Gettysburg campaign from the time the Army of Northern Virginia starts to leave Virginia on June 3rd until the time they cross back over the Potomac River on the 4th of July, or the 14th of July. And then, of course, at the tactical level is every battle, right? This is going to be whether the fight for Little Round Top, the wheat field, or the peach orchard. Now, within that structure, though, there are some imperatives. Everything we do at the tactical level and operational level had better get us to our strategic end, and if it doesn't, it's waste. Which means we will accept suboptimal activities at the operational and tactical level that get us to our strategic end over optimal ones that do not. Moreover, in this whole view, we could argue there's structure given to this too. If we use our Karl von Clausewitz, as a professor at the Army War College, I have to throw this in or I lose my union card. I got to mention Clausewitz at least once a day. And he would say, this whole thing is bound, a nation at war is bound the same way you and I. If we want to lose weight, how much weight will be determined by how hard we work and for how long. For a nation at war, Clausewitz would argue, the value of the political object determines the magnitude and duration of sacrifice. How much do you want to achieve that political object? That determines magnitude of sacrifice. For a nation at war, that's the cost in lives, dollars, and prestige, and of course, time. So that value of the political object bounds the strategy then bounds everything we do at the operational or tactical level. Does that help some?
That helps some.
Chris?
And all I add to Doug, because he is amazing at what he does, is I always put a fourth level up there, and that's politics. Politics and policy come down to your strategy, and strategy is basically us translating that political end down to the operational level, which will then result in a battle and hopefully the victory of your war. So what you want to do is make sure that your politics align with your strategy and vice versa. And it takes a long time for both of these armies to figure this out. Because remember, a lot of this stuff, even though we drop Clausewitz a lot, is still pretty new.
So, for your average soldier, like we all know I had many, many soldiers who are here and everywhere else, what do they know about this in 1860 and 1865? Does any of that, is it something they understand, or are they just like, I'm going to do what I'm told, and I'm going to get out there and make sure that me and my brothers don't get killed?
So yes and no. To Chris's point, he brought up policy. I would say we could take this a step further, right? We go all the way back to enduring values and beliefs. Those drive interest, interest drive policy, policy drives strategy, And then we go down here. So it starts with enduring values and beliefs. I would argue they're all fighting for values and beliefs that they hold dear. This part they know. How though do we translate all those tactical activities into strategic end? This is a little bit of matters of depending where you are in that chain of command, what role you might have. For a guy like Robert E. Lee, who wears 3 hats here. Remember, he's the commander of the Army of Northern Virginia. He's really the theater commander, responsible for everything from Pennsylvania to North Carolina, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Appalachians. But he's also the principal military advisor to Jefferson Davis. I would argue that many of the decisions he makes here at Gettysburg are wearing that 3rd hat as the principal advisor to military to Jefferson Davis, more than the commander of the Army of Northern Virginia.
And I would say that the only people who have heard of Clausewitz on Cemetery Hill on July 2nd, 1863 will be some of the men of the 11th Corps. Clausewitz, even though we talk about him a lot today, he is a German, he's a Prussian, and he is not widely read, mostly because he is published in German. Most of the men around here will have read a man named Antoine-Henri Jomini, who is a Swiss-born French-speaking officer who serves on the staff of Michel Ney, who is the bravest of the brave, according to Napoleon, for his actions during the Russian campaign. And Jomini is absolutely a self-serving self-promoter, but he does know military strategy and tactics because he has learned from the best, and that is what Clausewitz calls the god of war, and that is Napoleon himself. Now, Clausewitz is going to be studied, especially today on staff rides, because in 1873 he is translated after the Franco-Prussian War because von Moltke the Elder makes him a household name. Then in 1908 we start having the British start taking him in, but it's not until 1942 that the United States Army really starts understanding who this Clausewitz guy is, and in the 1950s we start to integrate him into our larger teaching strategy here overall for strategic theory, and he starts trumping who is this Jomini guy now. Clausewitz is the man.
Hey, Chris, can I give it back to you real quick? I just want to assure you all that, Chris and Doug were just getting started with this stuff. I mean, this could go on for a long time, and I would find it endlessly interesting. Now, before I kick it back to Wayne, Ann, did you have anything else? I'll bet you might.
I do. So I want to ask one more question about that, and then I want to remind all of our viewers about something that they can get for free. So I had an ancestor who was a captain, so he was more involved with not the whole big plan, but he was involved with strategy. He had more of a bigger picture. But all my privates, they were just the will to live, the will not to look good, to do all the right things.
So I would even argue at the captain level, and even probably at the colonel level, these are tactical level
Okay,
players.
that's still where they
When
were
we
doing.
start talking operational level, fighting campaigns, you're now talking about army commanders. Even maybe corps commanders can play at that level, but at some point we're talking about literally the smallest pieces that fight these battles, and what we try and do is take these little battles, aggregate them together to achieve operational effects, and then put those operational effects to achieve strategic ones. So they aren't playing at that highest level at all.
So
They're
they just
technical experts operating at that lowest level of war, trying to win at their assigned tasks to achieve a larger purpose.
And that's what they were there for. That is very helpful. All right, we did have a question from one of our viewers. She put in just this gruesome story of one of her ancestors who had been shot in the stomach and lived with an open wound for 11 years. I hope you can find out more about him. One place for you all to get started is fold3.com. All of our Civil War content is free from today to July 18th, so now is the time to get on and start researching. Also, if you are an American Battlefield Trust member, and why wouldn't you be? Because we want to preserve this land. This is an amazing place, and you all must come. You all must come. But if you go to fold3/battlefields, you can get 30% off, or $30 off, one or the other, I can't remember off the top of my head, for the first year, and you want to do that. But go find your ancestors who fought in the Civil War and then go to the battlefields. I promise you, it will be a life-changing experience. Thank you.
That's great, Ann. Thanks so much. We've really enjoyed all the work that Ancestry Fold 3 did to help prepare us. I hope you're looking in the comments when we have artifacts out. They're posting memorial pages to the people that we talked about and family tree pages, and I think you're going to like what you see. I wanted to say way after the fact that I think it was Jay from Manchester, Maryland, needs to watch our video from the other day with Tim Smith talking about Pipe Creek and pronouncing it Manchester, Maryland, because that's how he talks. So make sure you do that. And I'm seeing all sorts of other good friends that makes me really happy. So thank you all for watching. Now, we've talked about a lot of the fighting, but I think we might have left off the most famous part of West Cemetery Hill, and that is a big set of booms that are going to occur right before the most famous attack at Gettysburg. So Wayne Motts.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gary. I just want to kind of rotate Chris right over here to where the 73rd is, because the position of two of these regiments for July 3rd, 1863, during this great cannonade at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, is right on this side, our side of the Taneytown Road. It goes all the way down to 55th Ohio and the 73rd Ohio. And then on the other side of the road, well, you'll have the 136th New York. And these units have to be under this tremendous artillery fire. Keep in mind, where is the artillery? Some of the artillery is right up against where this infantry line is. There's a great story here, and I gotta say, listen everybody, if it's not true, it ought to be true. And it's a story written by a soldier in the 136th New York Volunteer Infantry Regiment. He says on the afternoon of July 2nd, his command, which is right up here over my left shoulder, back behind us, on the west side of where the Taneytown Road is located, those troops are up against the stone wall. And he says that the artillery's right behind them, firing artillery shells over the heads of the troops. This soldier claims after the Battle of Gettysburg, the troops were so rattled that one of the soldiers along that stone wall, every one of his teeth fell out a week after the battle. And this soldier claimed that was because of the cannonade. So it's one of those stories that if it isn't true, it certainly ought to be true, because it shows you the concussion and the amount of gunfire that's over here from the artillery. Every foot of ground over here in the annex just about was struck by an artillery shell. And if you're here in the annex where we are here on this part of Cemetery Hill, when you all did your video over at Benner's Hill, you're going to have crossfire between all of Ewell's artillery and along with Hill's artillery, crossed right into this apex of where this line is. So for many of these Union soldiers, they got a front row seat to Pickett's charge, but it's going to be a bad situation for them because they're going to be under 2 hours of this heavy cannon fire between 1 and 3 p.m. They're going to get to see the repulse, but they're going to have to take a lot of knocks over here. I also want to say we are in the National Cemetery. It is my privilege and pleasure, along with some of us here, to decorate the graves with the licensed battlefield guides. They have decorated the graves here at the National Cemetery over the anniversary of the battle for, my recollection, 33 years. And this year, they not only did the graves for the Battle of Gettysburg, they did all the graves, including the annex, which, as mentioned earlier, was 7,000 graves. It took us about an hour. There were well over 50 people that volunteered to do that. And of course, I just want to thank everybody, because what a great honor to the veterans here. That's why you see all the flags that are in the National Cemetery today. So, Gary, I just want to say on behalf of the Gettysburg Foundation and myself, thanks for letting us be part of this.
Thanks so much, Wayne. You know, I've known Wayne for going on 30 years. I think it's gonna be 30 years. Oh, it's actually more than 30 years now. I think I met you in late 91. So what a quality guy. I'm so happy for you, Wayne, to be heading up the Gettysburg Foundation now. And, you know, that you were heading up, putting out the placement of these flags just says a lot about you. So thanks so much. You know, great job, everybody. And what I want to say real quick is that, you know, we're posting so many videos, I think some of you are missing them. We covered the campaign before July 1st. We covered the first day yesterday. Today, we've been to Benner's Hill. We shot 2 videos along Emmitsburg Road. Our Devil's Den video has posted on Facebook and YouTube, and now this cemetery one, and I think there's 4 or 5 more to go today. We shot everything that we can shoot live, we shot live, but we're also posting some where we have bad connectivity, so you'll see them. They might overlap with one another, but we appreciate you engaging. We love your comments. Thanks, Wayne. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Doug. And thank you all for supporting battlefield preservation and education.